Hello. Welcome to the fourth and final chapter of our book, The Sacred and the Profane by Mircea Eliade. Today we will talk about human existence and sanctified life. Basically, this fourth chapter, which is very rich and beautiful, will talk a bit about the sanctification of life and the connection with reality, about various aspects. It's like a conclusion to everything we've seen so far. I hope you have the opportunity to watch and rewatch these lectures and follow along with the book, of course, because this book by Mircea Eliade is almost like a gateway for us to move away from the disorientation we experience due to a very profane life. In other words, this loss of direction, this loss of an East, what he presents are protocols for reconstructing a life aligned with nature. Aligned with the laws of nature, meaning for man to rediscover himself within life once more. I think it's one of the most useful things we can discuss in this historical moment we are living in. This book was handpicked precisely because we really need to remember all of this. Let's get started. In the beginning, he will talk about the need to understand other forms of religiosity. He will remind us that the behavior, the mindset of the ancient religious man is now very distant for the modern Western man, especially. We can no longer think about and understand these protocols, these guidelines. Just a moment ago, I was mentioning today, the day I'm recording, is the first day of spring. And you don't see anyone, absolutely no one talking about this. We no longer give importance to these seasonal festivals. Spring festivals, in great civilizations of the past, were among the most important there were. It was the restart of the circus. It was as if it were truly the beginning of a new year. And look, the media, people, it goes completely unnoticed. It no longer means anything to the modern man. We have lost this alignment with the laws of nature. He says that the Western man is familiar with Christianity, knows some religions of classical antiquity, for example, Greece and Rome, and is acquainted with some of the great religions of the East, like Buddhism, Taoism, and Hinduism. But the religion of gatherer peoples, of small groups from various traditions scattered around the world, like nomads, hunters, gatherers, is completely foreign to us. It would be interesting to revisit that. He even adds something that I found very interesting. If you take the medieval peasant, he mentions this around the 1980s. The peasant of today's Europe. There are certain beliefs that he is still very similar to that medieval peasant. He even mentions the ancient peasant from the Paleolithic era. There are certain beliefs that have not been entirely erased from the mindset of the rural man. For example, in Europe, according to him, he says there was a cosmic religion that was heavily based on these natural events, and for the urban man, Christianity completely erased this. But for the rural man, it did not, because the close presence of nature imposes its rhythms, imposes its appreciation. So when you take a certain man from a rural community, and their beliefs, sometimes, are very similar to everything that existed back then. From the medieval peasant to the ancient peasant. He says that, at certain times, certain aspects of this rural man's beliefs are more primitive than religious beliefs. Greco-Roman. I found this observation very interesting. So, if we want to understand a bit of how it was, we need to set aside this habit of thinking that everything now is superior to what came before. This remnant of positivism, of thinking that everything that came before was inferior. If we are interested in observing these small peoples, these civilizations of nomadic peoples, and understanding their religious structure, we certainly have a lot to learn. And it's a very interesting work. That's what he dedicated himself to. So, he says that the Homo Religiosus, this ancient man, still survives out there in these isolated places. He believes that the world exists because the gods created it. The world is not chaotic. Notice that one of the strongest things for us to consider is this. When we believe that the world is chaos, there is an arbitrariness to the events. And if the events are arbitrary, it means they have nothing to teach me. If the world is cosmos, it means there is an order. And where there is order, there is learning behind it. There is a reason for this order. There is a logic that arranged it this way. There is a law. In order, there is learning. In chaos, there is not. He will then say that the gods created this universe, this manifested world, with a purpose. And what does the cosmos say? The cosmos communicates, and the gods reveal themselves through it. Once again, I remind you of a book I read, another one for your bedside table, which is the Theophany of Volterotto, where he talked about this, about the close relationship certain civilizations had with the aspect they considered divine. As if, in a certain way, their dialogue with the cosmos had shaped the profile and character of this civilization. Otto reaches a certain point where he says that it wasn't. It wasn't the Greeks who created their gods. It was their gods who created the Greeks. At the time, this was a book stirring a lot of controversy. And it's very beautiful. It's worth reading. The Theophany by Volterotto Otto. And it's similar to what he's saying here. So, the cosmos lives and speaks, and the gods reveal themselves through it. If you know how to read the order of the universe in the sequence of events, you see a bit. Because with a purpose, the cosmos wouldn't have been thrown together randomly. It has a meaning, a logic, a dharma, and it has an endpoint where it intends to arrive. With all beings and with each one of them individually. There is a proposal for humanity, for instance, and by understanding the cosmos, we see the face of God reflected. We understand the purpose of the universe. Remember Einstein saying that he wanted to see the thoughts of God. Perhaps with a slightly more symbolic observation of life, we can achieve this, because the world is nothing more than the expression of this thought. Of these divine beings, according to the religious man, it is endowed with order and is entirely pedagogical. Continuing, humanity. As a microcosm, meaning the gods created not only the external nature, but also human nature. As well, it is endowed with order, and it too has an endpoint, a purpose to achieve. We should see ourselves in the laws of the cosmos. So, you will notice something that is super interesting. Recurrent in all traditions, both the smaller ones he mentions and the great religions of the past. Consider the moment of cultivating the land sacred, the moment after harvesting the fruits. This moment of cultivating the earth means the seed diving into the matrix, fertilizing the matrix, to then draw life from it. Today, we have this done in an absolutely mechanical way. Governed by the laws of agribusiness, there's nothing sacred about it. In all traditions, this was a moment that was a sacrament. It was part of one of the most important moments of the year. And when a person also united with someone, a partner, to also embody this idea of the seed fertilizing the earth, for them, they were repeating a cosmic mystery. The same law that generates fruits from the earth also generates fruits from the union between two human beings. Not just physical fruits, but also psychic, mental, and spiritual fruits. The mystery of life unfolds at every level. Therefore, if you want to know the reason for the actions that human beings have present in their lives, you should seek it. What do these acts intend when they repeat in nature? Ah, yes, when nature is fertilized, it intends to give continuity to life. This must also be what I do. On all levels, when my mind is fertilized, when my psyche is fertilized, when my body is fertilized, I am opening doors to give continuity to life on these planes. You begin to see yourself by observing nature. As all of this has emptied, nature has become silent to us. Notice what the difference in perspective would be. If you started to consider that the events in your life are not random, I have something to tell you. If you started to find the correspondence of this type of sign in nature and understood the purpose of life through it and aligned yourself with this purpose of life, walking alongside nature and not against it. This is Eliade's idea. He will continue to say that these correspondences for the religious person were experienced. They weren't just ideas. Human fertilization and the fertilization of the earth are equivalent. That's beautiful to say. That sounds very intellectual. This wasn't about flaunting knowledge for them. They truly lived this. This made them end up sacralizing the everyday acts of life. In other words, life was full of sacraments. And the idea is that life in its entirety was sacred. Every time a person finds meaning in an act, they sanctify it. And this act becomes real, and not the mere alienation that we do anyway. Without seeking anything, simply through instinctive programming, it becomes a real act. It becomes endowed with meaning. And the idea is that, one day, our entire life would be endowed with meaning. But at least the cardinal points, like the one we live today. It's spring, life comes to light. At the very least, we should preserve these cardinal points. And we should also preserve the cardinal points of our lives. And from there, let the meaning spread and dominate all of life. We did the opposite. We banished life from any meaning. Gregorio de Matto's life. He goes on to say that when the religious man lived, for example, still using the same example, he uses that Indian passage where the man turns to his wife and says, "I unite with you. I am the spirit, you are the matter. I am the sky, you are the earth." He says, "Look, be careful not to interpret," as Hegel interpreted, thinking that this man suffered from an alienation from his human nature. Hegel said that ancient man did not have a defined identity outside of nature. And Eliade talks about this, and I completely agree with him. That's not true. This man knew he was a human being. He knew that his wife was a woman and not the earth. He knew he was a man and not the sky. But what he was doing is making an association without ceasing to be what he is. He unites with the entire process of the universe. To ensure that your life is also integrated into the process of the universe's transformation. Let the laws be aligned, but he does not lose his identity. With that would be madness. That never happened. Continuing. He will say that cosmic symbolism gives a new value. There are acts that, even though they are simple, become imbued with meaning. We have to realize that extraordinary things are very rare in our lives. Extraordinary, both for good and for bad. Sometimes we experience peaks of slightly greater joy or slightly greater suffering. But we are simple people in whose lives these things happen. Simple facts, but even so, just because they are simple doesn't mean they lack meaning that can teach us a lot. When I, in my lectures, share small personal experiences in not trying to glorify myself with that, but on the contrary, I am showing that a simple situation, which everyone experiences as well, can be a source of learning. So he will talk about, for example, physiological acts like eating, sleeping, getting sick, and healing. Sexual union, in other words, all of this can be done imbued with meaning. It can be done in the name of something. I mentioned to you in some of these past classes that it is said that what cannot be sacred is a sign that it should not be done. This is the foundation of the oldest ethics, is the root of ethics. That which cannot be done in the name of something is a sign that it is transgressing the law of nature, including human nature. Therefore, everything that is necessary can be sacred, and what is not necessary should not be done. Necessary, realize that we are considering all the needs of man, of body and soul. So he will talk, for example, that the main acts of physiological life, even for humans, were imbued with meaning and were sacraments. This reminds me a lot of a passage from Gibran. In fact, Gibran's prophet puts this very clearly. When he talks about eating and drinking, when he talks about dwellings, houses, he offers prayers to this act of having a home, of building a house, to this act of nourishing oneself. When he sacrifices a being to be able to feed on it, he says, "By the same law that sacrifices you, I too will be sacrificed. And my blood and your blood will serve future life, will serve the great flow of life." In other words, It's an entire ceremony for living, a simple act like preparing a meal. An act seemingly trivial to us. How to build a house. How we build our homes. When we deal with a team that goes there to work and we don't even go there to look, we don't participate, we don't dream, we don't enjoy, every little piece is something completely trivialized, and there isn't one of the fundamental protocols of life. In not saying it's the most important, but one of the two most important things is precisely this idea of the home. It is the second garment of man in the world. It is the second alignment he has with the laws of the universe. In other words, first, the body itself, second, your home, then the temple, and finally, the universe as a whole. These four worlds must be aligned. And such important things like these are trivialized for us today. Try it, give it a shot, because it won't be worth anything. This reading of Eliade, if you don't take the time to look at the simple things in your life and consider that they're imbued with meaning and can teach you something. Today, reflecting on this, as I prepared to give this talk to you, I experienced something quite simple, yet very interesting. A flower that had been in my vase for a few days. It dried up and it was time to discard it. But I love flowers so much that it always gives me a pang in my heart. When you're about to throw one away, after all, it served you so well, beautified your life so much, and it gives you a certain ache. Then I took it in my hand and said, "Look, did you beautify my life these past few days?" Now, the life is gone, and only a remnant remains that will be discarded. In the same way, one day only a remnant of me will remain to be discarded. But I hope that, throughout my journey, I can beautify someone's life as you did with mine. And suddenly, that little prayer I was making for a dead rose turned into a ceremonial moment. I looked at it between my hands and said, I hope that when my body is also discarded, I will have served to beautify someone's life, as you beautified mine. And that act of placing a withered rose in the trash was no longer just anything, was ceremonial. He taught me something very profound and very beautiful. This cycle that all beings live and that are constantly teaching us about our own cycle. Understand, this is what Eliade is trying to convey. Life can be entirely ceremonial, and in this way, we are constantly growing. So he will say that, according to these traditions, some of these ancient peoples even believed that each part of the human body was associated with a specific star or a particular element of nature. Like fire, like water, like air, each element of the human body. So there was a relationship, even, between the behavior of a human organ and the behavior of that being in nature, so that man could better understand himself. These were associations made from a long observation of life. This observation that we no longer make today. We walk down the street completely blind, completely focused on our minds, bewildered about what it will do next. Turned inward in such a way that sometimes we can't even say, if there was a flower along the way, if there was a tree that had blossomed, a tree, nothing, nothing. We can't say anything about the path. Sometimes we get startled. Hey, I'm here. We pass by unnoticed, and life had a bunch of messages to give us. Therefore, in other words, he says that this observation of nature led men to find elements in nature that had behaviors similar to their own organs. And from the outside, this observation helped them understand themselves. This applies on a physical level and psychological level. We can do this too. Observe life, its elements. If we consider, for example, how much the psyche, our emotional world, is associated with air, how much our energies are associated with water, how much our physical body is associated with the earth, and how our higher thoughts can be associated with fire. We begin the observation of a fire to perceive. When our mind is ignited by something noble, just, and good, it is much like a flame of fire. We begin to learn about ourselves by seeing ourselves reflected in nature, by making symbolic connections, by learning to see through. That's really beautiful. People, think about it. We have an open book all around us. all the time. So he's going to talk about the house. He says that the religious man always seeks to be around a center. He knows that the house has a center, a point of connection with the universe. It is a sacred space. There is the place where our life is situated, the center of our life. We circulate, we oscillate, but we return to that point. It's like the axis of our life. And the religious man always seeks to be around the axis. That's why he doesn't get lost. If you make a collection, once I used to do this, I would think about how many things follow this principle of the center. For example, the speech I'm giving to you right now. I have an ideal position for my hands, an ideal position for my head, but every now and then I waver around it and return to that center. In various situations in life, the principle of the center is applied without much awareness. We don't really know. When founding a city, they plant a cross, there will be the church, the main one, and everything expands around the center. So, he says that the religious man always seeks to be close to this center because a physical center, symbolically, makes him internally strive to be close to a psychological, moral, and spiritual center. So, he doesn't lose the connection. And by not losing the connection, he doesn't lose the purpose of his life, the meaning. He doesn't get disoriented. He always knows where the east is. And what we are experiencing is exactly this syndrome of being lost. Like a leaf in the wind. Let's go where the wind takes us. And the disorientation, the lack of a center, will cause a dissociation from a psychic point of view, sometimes extremely painful. A feeling of losing ourselves. And we no longer know who we are, nor why we came, which can lead to a situation of great pain. Depression, anguish, and many elements sometimes stem from a life that is aimless or disoriented, without a center. So, the house was a very important element. He says that the house was an imago, mundi, the image of the world. In other words, yet another microcosm. Man is a microcosm within the microcosm, which is the temple, within the macrocosm, which is the world. Everything aligned. He says that everyday existence, remember this phrase, because I found it very interesting and very beautiful. It's a summary of everything he has said so far. Everyday existence contains a cipher, a key to decode. The entire journey and pilgrimage to the center of the world. In other words, everyday existence. It's all asking you, did you bring the key? Decipher me or I will devour you. Because deep down, it devours you. If you don't delve into the facts of life, soon they will be consuming you with boredom. Through repetition, without meaning. When we don't see through the facts, we end up only seeing a facade, and it's always the same one. Life becomes a bore. So, it's like looking out a car window and always seeing the same landscape. Why? Because you're not moving, you're standing still, and logically, the scenery will always be the same. When we move, in the sense of seeking more and more understanding of life, more and more reflection, more and more inner life, the landscape outside the window changes. There is no boredom. And boredom is one of the ways the Sphinx devours us. If we don't decipher it, pass through the facts and see what they want to tell us. The simple thing, the rose that withered in your home, had a message for you before you tossed it in the trash. He will talk about cosmic symbolism, which adds a new value to an object or an action, even if it's simple. A continuation of what we've been discussing so far. He says that, for example, the upper opening that exists in the human skull, which, according to various traditions, would be the upper chakra, the Sahasrara chakra. And this opening is very similar to the opening that must exist at the center of a temple. You will even see that needle at the center of the temple, as it reminds us. That extension that exists at the center of the head in images of Buddha. In other words, this upward opening, which exists at the central point of all things, if a person finds their center, they have an opening upwards. A vertical communication with the divine, with Dharma, with the laws of nature. Therefore, he finds it easy to align himself, to find his place in the world. So, it is said that in all fields, there is this idea that the center must have a vertical relationship, which, sometimes, in houses are the chimneys. There must be a point that connects man with the spiritual world. And he speaks of ancient traditions. For example, in India, a dying person's house with the habit of removing the tiles, sometimes even breaking the roof, so that this person can more quickly detach from the body and ascend. It is said that Buddha also broke the cosmic egg. In Buddhism, the idea is that the arhats break through the roofs of palaces to ascend to the heavens. The arhats are wise. These wise ones say that, at a certain point, not even a castle roof can hold back their ascending impulse. In other words, wisdom enables a person to increasingly find this center and elevate themselves through it. In other words, wisdom is not the accumulation of information, wisdom is the elevation of consciousness. And increasingly, this idea of vertical communication with the realm of ideas, with the spiritual plane, with this realm of the gods. For humanity, for the cosmos as a whole. He will say that modern man has a body, a house, and a cosmos that are opaque and mute, inert, disconnected. I find it so impressive when I try to talk about this because sometimes there are no parameters to explain it. When I'm asked, for example, to give a talk for Yellow September about today's issues with depression, of suicide, it's obvious that. There are other factors, I have no doubt about that, personal factors, but it's obvious that behind this, ultimately, there is a disoriented, untethered, disconnected humanity that no longer has an axis, no longer has a center, and therefore lacks a purpose. Your life does not repeat any universal purpose. It does not connect with the human ideal. It does not fulfill nature's dream for humanity, therefore motivation is lacking, it is repetitive, it is an eternal return. Without generating the spiral, we walk in circles because we do not ascend. We do not generate the spiral. We are disconnected from the mysteries of nature, including human nature. That's why we fall into opacity, into silence. We are no longer interested in the noises of the world, and we do not hear the song of life. We only hear the noises of life's appearance, the mask of life. It's very difficult for a person to find their place in such a chaotic universe without these parameters, without these canons, these sacraments. He must feel like a participant in something greater, understand what his role is within this play, which is not chaotic. It has a script, and it has an excellent director who expects each one to fulfill their role and reach their maximum potential according to what they are, to what nature has in store for them, both collectively as humanity and individually as a human being. So, he will say that the current urban religion, when it speaks of salvation, refers to a personal salvation. I want to be saved from the things that afflict me. And what are these things? The lack of money, the lack of comfort, the lack of recognition, in other words, a salvation focused on personal interests. In other words, even the good of modern man is a selfish good, disconnected from the whole. We don't think about the whole. Our salvation is the salvation from those little things that distress us, the pebbles in our shoes. Never from the pebbles in the shoes of humanity. And all of this also isolates us too much. When a person feels isolated, automatically, without knowing why, they also feel lonely. The world is no longer the work of God, and events are random. In other words, life is not endowed with any meaning. For those who don't want to get anywhere, life is meaningless. Life is madness, where we suffer without any meaning, unless, perhaps, it's the intention of a sadistic God wanting to see us suffer. Suffering is no longer a way to smooth out the rough edges so that we emerge greater on the other side, because we are not going anywhere, nor do we want to become greater. We don't even know that this is possible. Our New Year's resolutions, our projects for January 1st, are always very material. No one thinks, I want to end this year as a better human being, more worthy of my human condition. To better occupy your place in the universe, to be a factor of addition. No. Occupations are very fleeting. The concerns are very mediocre. Man is disconnected. Therefore, it does not undergo the so-called transfiguration. Have you ever seen that marvelous painting of Jesus ascending transfigured? This idea of elevating oneself, it does not undergo this transfiguration, which makes us increasingly human. Better equipped to respond to life's adversities, better equipped to occupy our space, to fill this void of human beings, from which nature suffers so much. Think about it. He will talk a little about initiations. From the perspective of ancient civilizations, initiations were understood in two ways. First, the biological initiations of life. It was the young one who was about to become a child, who was about to become a teenager, or a teenager who is about to become a young adult. There are all those puberty protocols that various civilizations had. They would take them, place them in a separate hut, and they would go through trials, go through a series of protocols. Sometimes the girl, too, when she had her first menstruation, was also taken to an isolated hut. There was a matron there who conducted all the processes, and this process would repeat itself. Before that, at birth, or even during puberty, then at the time of marriage, at the time of conjugal union and childbirth. Then, at the time of death, that is, all the protocols that prepared a person for the fundamental events of life. The most well-known, generally, is that of puberty, where the young person was isolated and went through a series of symbolic trials, which taught them, symbolically, what life is like. So he will talk a lot about this. He will talk about the symbol of the narrow gate. He says that every time you walk along a path, any path, imagine that life is like that. Also a path. At a certain point, there will be a gateway, and this gateway separates the outside from the inside. You have to prepare yourself, clean your feet, you are entering a new environment. He says that all gateways, all bridges, all the paths, they are a good moment for you to reflect on the gateways you will cross in your life, about the bridges you will cross between one world and another, one dimension and another of consciousness, about the roles you will have to play, about the adversities you will have to face. So, this symbolism of the narrow gate was closely related to another type of initiation, which also existed in these ancient civilizations, which was the initiation into a certain religious group, the preparation to enter a select group of wise men. You know that this has happened throughout history since Egypt, from Abydos to Samothrace to Cumae. The religious event is Eleusis. The religious event is an event of transposing consciousness from one level to another. The event of maturity. It reminds me a lot of what I always tell you. From the alchemical works, it is the moment of the work in yellow, citronidas, of maturity, when a person understands the plan of life and aligns with it, becoming a reference point to educate society so that it too can align. This was another type of initiation that also existed. He talks about the many religious traditions, including Christianity, that refer to this symbolism of the narrow gate. That one must be prepared to pass through it. Sometimes one must vow to demonstrate humility. One must have the necessary posture to leave a mundane and profane world and enter the sacred world. This was fundamental in these civilizations. These mature men were the center of that civilization. They ensured that the plan of life was carried out in the best possible way. There, among their own, among their people. They signaled the protocols of life because they understood them. And he says that this religious man also believed that a person is not born complete. He is born a prototype, a sketch of what he is meant to become. In other words, a person is not born ready. They make themselves, build themselves. A person is a construction whose merit lies in their own consciousness and will. So there was a whole drive in this religious person. In these ancient traditions, as well as in these small current civilizations, an impetus for self-transformation, for self-improvement, to get closer to the gods, to get closer to what he considers a mature person, a wise man, a reborn man, an initiate. And he will represent this. Some time ago Not long ago, we were reading a book called Tales of the Soul's Conquest of Evil, which even talks about one of these myths. It's when Lancelot crosses a bridge made of lances, swords. He crosses it with bare feet and hands. And it also talks about the Iranian Sivat Bridge and other myths that speak of dangerous bridges, of the perilous crossing that takes a person from an almost animalistic condition to the fullness of the human condition. For those who recall that passage from Nietzsche, where he says that man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Superman, it's something very similar. A dangerous walk, a dangerous hesitation, a dangerous return to the path. In other words, in various mythologies, in various traditions, there is talk of this perilous crossing, so that a person may reach the fullness of the human condition. In other words, life is endowed with a purpose. It is not chaotic, it is not aimless. Time is not there to be wasted. Time is there to be used in this drive to elevate our consciousness, to propel it upwards, which is the best we can do for ourselves and for humanity. The best we can do for humanity is to grow, because in this way we become a reference point to lift people up. So, he talks about these rites of passage. He even adds an interesting point, that marriage in Greek is telos, which means consecration. Notice how this union today, for us, has become a mere whim, without greater consequences, a private matter of personal life. The telos was a consecration. They were two human beings consecrating themselves to serve life. It wasn't a triviality. It couldn't be any other way. Certain protocols that symbolized this commitment to life had to be fulfilled. These protocols would always echo in the memory of this couple, so they would remember why they were united, what they had come together around. They did not unite for each other, for mere personal enjoyment. They united to serve life on various levels. They united to empower each other on various levels. Remember Khalil Gibran saying to Mary Haskell, "Your love gives me wings." This also strongly reminds us of the idea of platonic soulmates. So, this protocol is extremely important, but something that today means almost nothing. Sometimes it almost turns into a game. We consider that we can do things however we see fit, which is the same thing. I remind you of how Confucius speaks about shared meals, so that nourishment feeds not just the body, but also creates an almost unison of intentions, of cooperation, of a pact to collaborate with one another in building our lives as human beings, how these things are suggestive. You need to make your life a laboratory. Take something that symbolizes something very sacred to you. Place this within your home, and you'll see how it, placed in a certain position, changes the polarity of your consciousness. You are no longer just anyone within your home. That house is a space where you draw closer to yourself, to the center. There, you are meant to find a point of peace, of serenity, and then go out into the world and return, bringing back the essence of the experience you lived. So, a symbol within our life already provides a touchstone. My swans, which I love so much, I look at them and remember how I want to float over the waters of matter. And I automatically align myself when I see that. That has a meaning. That is a powerful reminder of consciousness. Symbolic life is like that. Don't empty your life. Don't make life silent. Symbols are protocols for the ascension of consciousness. We cannot lose them, because otherwise we become lost. That's exactly what we are. Disoriented. So, he says that the non-religious man has this. Everything has become a mere personal, private matter, and everyone does it their own way. But this secularization of life, this profanation, is never complete. Because this symbolic life, this deep perception of the meaning of things, it remains within us, repressed. And when it bursts in a terrible, misguided way. It will explode in the form of fanaticisms of all kinds, beliefs, superstitions, personality cults, idolatries. In other words, it comes out disorderly and in any way, in a manner that harms more than it helps. You did not channel it consciously. It will explode in a degraded manner, which is exactly the word he uses. So, you look at certain behaviors in society, they are purely fanatical, purely irrational. They are driven by an unconscious, symbolic need that surfaced as if a dam had broken. And the person doesn't realize that it seems like the fanaticism of the most extreme medieval man you can imagine. You look around you, sometimes, see, I do this, look and see. It feels like the Middle Ages. With this religious tendency that we seem to have overcome, it was merely repressed. And it explodes in a chaotic and frightening way. So, he will say that man in these ancient societies does not consider himself real. Until he goes through the sacraments that present him, represent him, make him real before his own consciousness and the consciousness of the people in the community. He enters into let's say, the status of being real when he approaches that which is reality. In other words, the cosmos, the creation of the universe, that is a reality. When I align myself with this, then I gain the status of being real. I am not real, I have an absolutely illusory life. I live in an illusory world. The status of reality is achieved when a person aligns themselves with the axis of the universe. And the reality of the axis of the universe will also grant him the status of being real. And this is important in all the protocols of life. So, he will talk a little about the initiatory rites in these ancient civilizations. And it's quite interesting because, of course, there was a decline where things became a bit brutalized. But classically, civilizations have an entire process that very much resembles that alchemical process I talked to you about. The work in black. Usually, they go to the cabin in the middle of the forest. The young man at puberty, the young woman after her first menstruation. There, she faces her trials. He faces his trials. It's as if he has been swallowed by the monster. He fights from within the monster to destroy it, to defeat it. Then comes a series of trials, some of which sometimes involve a bit of pain. Sometimes they literally pass through the skin of an animal. Egypt had this. In other words, the skin of a certain animal was stretched out and the young person, who was undergoing their trials, would pass beneath the skin of the animal. It means that he overcame the animal and was born as a man. And after that, he was reintroduced to society, like a newborn, who had consciously earned the human merit. Do you know why? Because, symbolically, it was presented to him. What is life? If he went through this, understood it. He reflected, he is prepared for life. Symbolically, he has already lived it. And now he goes with all the protocols already assimilated, and knows how to respond when these things factually present themselves in your existence. He says that the religious man wants to be different from the mere animalistic man as he was born, and strives to reach a religious ideal of humanity. He strives to be truly a human. It reminds me of Pinocchio. A man who wants to be bad will never be more than a man of wood or a wooden boy. Strive to truly want to be a real man. Remember, once again, the Greek mythology that I talked to you about. That the basis of all ethics was why are you good? Why are you noble? Why are you just? Because I want to reach the heights of Olympus. Not because it brings me advantages, but because it is my place. I have to go towards the place that nature has reserved for me. My role is to build my identity, to become a complete human being, and therefore, this is the way, this is the method to use the chisel to sculpt myself. So, he will say that the initiate is the man who knows. The myths knows the sacred secrets and knows the names of the gods. He is the transfigured man, that is, luminous and elevated. His consciousness is luminous. Notice how interesting this is, of knowing the names of the gods. Just that could be a whole lecture, folks. Remember that biblical phrase, and in the beginning was the Word. The word, the voice, the sound, implies vibration. By knowing the names of the gods, I am actually understanding the level at which they vibrate. I identify my vibration and can work to elevate it in that direction. Its idea of full internal name. Mantras were nothing more, when pronounced correctly, than the names of the gods. Read the Ramayana, you will see them there pronouncing the names of the gods as a way to bring them closer to themselves. Knowing the name of things in these ancient traditions gives you a certain power over them, as you automatically enter into a relationship with them. And the name of things is the level of vibration at which they exist. Power over ourselves to find the level of vibration where we are, the name of the gods, and try to refine our vibration to draw closer to them. We are worthy because they are not simply beings on a higher vibrational level than ours. They are also our inspiration for growth. Our vibration becomes sacred in the direction of theirs, inspired by theirs. So, if you know the names of the gods, understand what he is saying here. Who was the initiate? Let's repeat that just so we don't miss any details. Do you know the myths? And found them within life. In other words, live the myths. Know the sacred secrets, that is, all the life protocols he must live by. To be able to purify oneself and ascend, to achieve the luminous transfiguration. And the names of the gods. In other words, a spiritual maturation. This is the mature man. This is Citronides. The work in yellow. The mature man who has mastery over himself and knows his place in the world. Thus, one is never lost. He knows where he is and where he wants to go. And these men were the axis, the center of this civilization. They guided so that no one among those people would lose their way. The belly of the monster, too, he mentions numerous mythologies that speak of those who went through the belly of the whale. Went through the belly of the monster. It means being dominated, devoured by the animal self, and managed to get out of there, overcome this trial. The great fundamental test of man is the test of humanization. We will not eliminate the animal self because it serves our survival, but we will surpass it and master it, like the story of the centaur. In other words, every time a man confronts this animal self, he is reliving the cosmic mystery. Where Marduk killed Tiamat, where the forces of cosmic order fought against the darkness and emerged victorious. And they spiraled, opening the manifested universe. They made life possible. This happens at the dawn of time. According to these mythologies, the universe organizes itself, manifests, overcomes chaos, overcomes darkness. The primordial chaos is set aside. So, every time a man manages to establish this human order in his life, he is reliving the primordial mystery. It is the cosmos with all its forces, repeating itself there. Once again, the primordial chaos was overcome. He says that, even from the perspective of healing, in the case of illnesses, many of these traditions did exactly that. Or at some point you got lost your balance. We will take you back into the belly of the monster so that you can emerge purified and retrace your path in the right way. Not letting yourself be caught by this deviation anymore. Because illness would be a deviation, an imbalance, some pollution that, along the way, due to inattention, we allowed to penetrate us, which threw us off balance. So, returning to the origins and retracing your path was used, even as therapy, for most illnesses. Because in the physical body, it is merely a reflection. From some problem, from some point where you got lost in the realm of ideas. Reposition yourself in the place that belongs to you, and you have the greatest possible chance to align your body with this center. With this primordial idea, around which all things harmonize, in other words, the greatest battle is the chaos that exists. It is for man to find his center, his true identity, the chaos, even physical, which is illness. He even talks about the young people in these civilizations who had a religious calling, who would become future shamans. He says that those who have this mystical calling were the ones who were most tested. For a while, they experienced such profound psychological chaos that it seemed like they were insane. In their youth, when they showed this religious calling, this mystical vocation, they seemed crazy. And then they had to overcome this massive test of mental disorder. And to return to having order, but order on another level, where now there is not only reason. They have intuition, a sensitive perception of the universe. Therefore, they are fit to lead this society. You will see that Samothrace was somewhat similar. The kings were sent there, the great leaders, chiefs of state were sent there. It seems that Philip met Olympia in Samothrace, those from Macedonia. In other words, it was a place where a person went through a specific set of trials, and their consciousness was elevated. At a point where he could see human trials from above, therefore, he was fit to lead. It's not just one or two peoples who talk about this. There are many. In pre-Columbian America, you see similar things as well. The symbolism of death. He will say that death is also a protocol that, when well understood, has no reason to be fear, because you observe nature. Remember those trials. You see nature. You see that nature goes through the belly of the beast, falls into a primordial chaos. It overcomes, returns to establish itself on earth, returns to order, returns to bear fruit. They speak, for example, of a tree. A tree is a tremendous lesson for a religious person. It's no wonder that so many civilizations had sacred trees. They looked at a tree and saw that it was sending its roots deep into the earth, so that its branches could reach towards the sky. In other words, you don't get close to the sky. As Jung says, if your paths don't come close to hell, down below. In other words, the roots dig deep within to profoundly know oneself, to deeply understand the universe. Once you have this firm, solid foundation of self-knowledge, of integration with the whole, with the one, your branches can ascend to a higher direction. And its fruits will be the finest. They looked at a tree and it eased their pain from suffering. My pain from suffering is nothing more than my roots deepening, nourishing in the bosom of the earth. This will later allow me to extend very high branches and produce wonderful flowers and marvelous fruits. Looking at a tree was symbolic enough to soothe someone's existential pain and anguish. Notice how rich this symbolic vision is when a man is never lost, how he is never alone. There, is surrounded by life and intelligent life, which is constantly conversing, dialoguing with him. He never gets lost, never is alone. So, overcoming death means knowing, for the religious person, knowing that we are permanently, always dying to the non-essential and being born to our essence ever closer to it. We are every day being born where we should be, being born and dying, dying to one level, being born to another. Therefore, death should not surprise us more. It's part of the cycle of life. And the cycle of life tells us that it is not the end. The spring that is being born today tells us, death was not the end. Winter was not the end. Look at life here, once again. In all planes, on the physical plane, the previous is here through the seeds. In other planes, it will certainly be there in some form as well. So, he says that to accomplish something new, this cosmogony is always recreated. You are going to raise a child. You are going to build a home. You are going to cultivate a spiritual calling. You return to the moment when the cosmos triumphed over chaos. Every time you want to create something new, consciously and endowed with value. Return to that primordial moment where the luminous forces overcame chaos. Because this has to happen within you. Otherwise, nothing luminous is born, nothing upright, nothing worthy of your life as a human being. He will continue talking about the more evolved religions of the East. For example, the matter of India, which used this image of returning to the womb in Indian sacrifices. From the profound understanding of the order of things, which was the Dharma. In other words, a Brahmin was a servant of the Dharma, one who understands it deeply and who was capable of sacrificing everything that hinders total surrender. This was the idea expressed religiously. Socrates referred to himself as a midwife. A midwife of souls, just as his mother, Phaenarete, had been a midwife of bodies. In other words, he assisted in the birth of the human within men. It was a tool to guide this process. He would say, well, I am like my mother, but not a midwife of bodies, a midwife of souls. But it's this same symbolism of rebirth, of initiation. Buddhism also speaks of the same thing, from death to the profane, as the condition for a new birth on an ever higher level. In other words, access to spiritual life among all peoples has always been associated with rebirth. Spring is rebirth. We could cultivate this mindset within ourselves and welcome it prepared, so that spring could also occur within us. And then it would be a great event. If each of us stopped and said, "Look, life is returning, let me also prepare to serve life." Just as the physical nature is preparing to receive and serve it. Let me prepare myself and join in. Let me walk alongside the cycles of nature. I am part of it. There isn't nature here and man here to enjoy it. So, man is nature. It was also programmed by this divine to also bear fruit, fulfilling the same cycle of life, following the same protocol. Well, he will say that the sacred, then this classic phrase by Eliade, the sacred, is the function of giving meaning. The religious man believes in an absolute reality, sacred from where life is born. And by aligning with this, he acquires the status of reality for his life. So, as the Romans used to say, we talked about this in the last class. In illo tempore, from time to time, take a moment from your life and steal from time for eternity. Steal from the mundane for the sacred. They knew that when they aligned themselves with the myths that narrated the fundamental creation of the universe, when they aligned with what is real, they saved their lives from banality and illusion. The idea was that they would save all of life one day, that no moment would be trivialized. They had a clear awareness of the trivialized as waste. What you trivialize, you throw away. What you sacralize have a real status and adds up. It adds to nature, to your nature, and to human nature in general. The religious man believes in the transcendence of everything, and then he will draw an interesting parallel for the non-religious man. Current. Nothing is transcendent. There is no reality. Everything is a play of opinions. Each person can think one thing. Nothing is more real than anything else. There is no reference for reality. The opinion of man holds the status of reality. I always repeat in the classroom that, in the Middle Ages, people's opinion was that the earth was flat, and yet it didn't become flat. Things are what they are. Human opinion does not shape reality. But the modern man, with all his technology, seems to think in this primitive way. He thinks his opinion holds the status of reality simply because he wants it to. It doesn't. That there is no way to improve oneself to see what is. He doesn't believe that a reality would exist, even if he didn't exist. And if he tries really hard, he might come to perceive it. No, everything is relative. Everything is a play of opinions. So, the universe is chaotic. There is no reality to be perceived. His opinion holds as much value as any other. They don't accept a model for humanity. One of the things I always mention in my lectures. When I say ideal, human, there are a lot of reactions. It doesn't exist. Each person can be whatever they want. It's not like God. Can stones be whatever they want? They have an entire ideal of resilience and serve nature. So, can plants be whatever they want? They have an entire role of synthesizing energies that makes them the foundation of the food chain. Animals cannot be whatever they want. They have an entire protocol for survival and perpetuation of the species, which, if not followed, they vanish from the earth quickly. Men cannot be whatever they want. They have to be men. The path you choose to walk towards this, of course, you have a choice. But the goal of a human being cannot be anything other than to be human. This is the most obvious of the obvious, which in today's society is denied. There is no human model of values, virtues, wisdom, none of that. Each person can be whatever they want, and everything is endowed with the same value. Or everything is stripped of the same value, which is more common. So, it's a game of opinions, and man believes this holds the status of reality and doesn't want to listen, doesn't want to see. Moreover, there is even a certain intellectual status for the man who denies any kind of order. And this disorder he sees in the world, he ends up producing in his own mind, ends up producing in his own life. Those who believe in chaos end up condemned to live it. And the consequences, we know what they are. So, modern man believes that the sacred is an obstacle to his freedom. He uses a phrase here that I found interesting. Modern man believes he will be free when he kills the last god. It's as if the leaf believed it would be free when it killed the last tree. It wouldn't be free, it would be a plaything in the hands of the wind. The wind would toss it in whatever direction it pleases, it would have no freedom at all. The only freedom it has is precisely the tree that gives it, to serve the life of the tree as a whole. You realize that we live with some modern dogmatisms, which are the emergence of a disfigured religiosity. Is this dogmatism? This is a type of fanaticism. The love for chaos. With all the disorder he promotes, and with all the resistance to believing in the cosmos and integrating with it. As if this would take away his freedom. How can you lose the freedom you never had? The man, who is a plaything in the hands of circumstances, never had freedom. How can you lose what you don't have? In other words, we live in a time of great irrationalism from a human perspective. For so much reason, from a technical standpoint, it was a strange time. He then says that modern man retains traces, transformed into superstitions and taboos, as we've already mentioned. It creates camouflaged mythologies, degraded ritualisms, a bunch of isms. Men are forced to choose from a bunch of games of opinions. What difference is there between the most violent religious fanaticism and the trendy beliefs we have today? And notice that they are of an extraordinary level of imposition. You have no idea, speaking from my own experience. Over the years, teaching philosophy, how many times have they tried to corner me to declare which schism I belong to? Affiliated leaf. When I say none, they don't believe me. No, you're hiding your true intentions, or then you're an outsider. I keep wondering how a person can say, I am such and such ism. I don't know, impartisan movement, whatever. How can you be part of a movement if you're not even yourself? What joined this movement? A shadow, a shell. The man who does not have himself, who is not his own master, cannot enroll what he does not possess in any movement. It's obvious. First, own yourself. Then you say, this being that I possess, that I have knowledge and power over, is such a thing. Not before. You can't enroll a shadow. You can't enroll a ghost. It's interesting, I was thinking about this and I thought, the few men in history who were masters of themselves, who had self-awareness and self-control, who could enroll in any ism because they had authority over themselves to do so. Curiously, they didn't enroll in any. Stop and observe. In other words, Lao Tzu didn't join Taoism, nor did Buddha join Buddhism, no ism at all. Plato didn't join Platonism. They weren't affiliated with anything, but rather the humble and persistent search for truth. In other words, you need to own yourself before you can enroll that self in anything. Secondly, those who possess themselves didn't join anything. This is curious because this pressure from fashion for you to use a label is a kind of degraded religiosity. Fanaticisms, religious leaders, saviors, political leaders, saviors, he will speak here. Fanaticism, political and religious figures, personality cults, myths of social redeemers, exotic movements, nudism, movements of excessive sexual freedom, all of this. It's nothing more than an outburst of this repression of the sacred mindset of the religious man, which surfaces chaotically. And that which you don't have conscious control over will manifest in a violent and degraded, disorderly manner. It's as if I didn't have control over this arm, and it moved erratically, and started hurting me, hitting things. That which I don't consciously control will manifest in a way that causes harm to me and the world. And that's exactly it. We don't erase the religious calling, we repress it, and it manifests in a distorted way. Many times we look around us, and it's a world full of isms, full of fanaticisms, idolatries, personalisms, etc. Well, he's going to talk a bit about current patterns, like, for example, psychoanalysis. He says it follows a sequence of an initiatory pattern. You descend into the womb of the creature, which is the search for your unconscious, your subconscious, the elements that are dormant. There, it makes you see them consciously. It allows you to master them. In other words, at its core, it's a protocol that, although perhaps not created with this intention, recovers a bit of what was done by the religious man very consciously, and who knew why. It's funny that if you say this religious man did it in the name of God, what does the modern man do? In the name of psychological balance. Do you find the current process more respectable? As if, deep down, it wasn't the same thing, because the pattern, the icon of all balance in the world, is unity. Call it whatever name you want. The pattern of the harmonious conjunction of things is unity. Call it God, call it whatever you want. Use a psychoanalytic process, use a religious process, but what orders the world is a pattern of unity. The seeds of greatness in man need an image to bloom and germinate. That's what Epictetus said, and the image we need is the image of the unity and harmony of the entire cosmos. This image allows us to align and harmonize ourselves, whether invoked by a psychoanalytic model or by a religious model, that sometimes have a very similar structure. What he reflects on in the book. And you'll say that sometimes in life, for example, in your professional life, when you go out there, you enter life and are pursued. When it's good, you suffer a lot of envy. When it's bad, there's no patience. With your improvement, you face disputes, competitions. In an unconscious, very painful way, you are also undertaking the same journey. You're also isolating yourself, diving into the belly of the beast, taking hits. Sometimes you spend your whole life without being able to escape the belly of the beast. If you knew the protocol, maybe you'd get out. If you understood that you are living a protocol, maybe you would get out, because with awareness, everything becomes much easier. And he will say, in many other aspects of life, we live the same protocol. We get stuck in their phases. For not knowing, for not having this basic initiation that the religious man had. So, he said that this religious man transcended the personal and opened himself to the world and the spirit. He was open to greater realities. And, therefore, he was like several concentric circles. He aligned himself, the small circle of man, with all the circles of life, up to the great circle of unity. He was aligned, he was open and communicating from the macro to the micro. In other words, the energy flowed from the macro to the micro. He learned to live through the processes, the protocols he observed around him in life. That is open for any of us to see. It's still here today. It didn't die in the time of the religious man. The protocols of life are happening now. At this moment. Today is spring. He says that without answers, without openness to the reality of the world, without alignment with the protocols of nature, man cannot escape some kind of existential crisis. Existence becomes disconnected and chaotic, without direction and without a good reason. It is very difficult for a man not to orient himself, not to engage in dialogue with life, and manage to give a greater meaning to his existence. He either escapes the drama or he lives it. There is no way to escape. Either he completely alienates himself in a life of mere pleasure, or he dives headfirst into this drama. Sometimes, even the one who seems to be enjoying a pleasurable life, alongside their pillow, experiences an existential crisis. A void, a cry that comes from within us, for meaning, for knowing what we are doing here and where we want to go with it. Finally, he is going to say something very interesting. That closes our chapter for today. Close the book. The primitive man indeed had enough intelligence to allow him to rediscover the traces of God visible in the world. Look at how beautiful this is. The primitive man had enough intelligence to allow him to rediscover the traces of God visible in the world. It is indeed intelligence, it is intelligere to choose among. To choose among the random and meaningless things we create for our entertainment. That which is pedagogical, that is instructive, that teaches us to live all the time, every day. Nature is there to teach you how to live. And when do we learn to dialogue with it? There is a flood of teachings. We begin our initiation protocol for life. Our protocol to seek the full human condition. The religious man knew how to do this. Rediscover the traces of God visible in the world. Reflect a little on this. Then, think about today's society, the current evils. This September, during Yellow September, think about the current crises. And see if we don't have some very interesting things here, like reflection. That's it. Thank you very much. Today we conclude our Dear Mircea Eliade, which I hope becomes a bedside read, a useful read for you. Reflect about it. Thank you.